Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content, and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'll be covering my top 10 science fiction themed board games. That's right, sci-fi for the day. And a couple of points I would like to make before going any further is, first of all, in making this list, I realized that I need to buy me some science fiction games pronto, because I have maybe 3 to 4 times as many fantasy themed games within my collection as I do science fiction. Another point I would like to make is that if you're interested in any of these games, I have covered most of these games in playthroughs. And if you want, you could click on the link of a playlist in the description down below so that you could see as to how some of these games are actually played. And the final point I would like to make is the way that I organize this list. I did factor in how important the science theme was to the gameplay experience, but I was very lenient quite often in ordering this or ranking this based on how much I like the game. Sometimes these games were so enjoyable to me that I cheated a bit in where they rank. So without any further ado, let's move on to my number 10. My number 10 science fiction themed game of all time is Star Realms. And this is one of those cheats, because this is a very much pasted on themed game. This is a deck building game with cards that have pictures of spaceships and space bases and space themed characters or space themed events. And again, very pasted on, doesn't really immerse you into that experience of intergalactic combat or warfare. However, it's a sound, mechanically speaking, deck building game that is a bit of a filler. It's a quick game. It plays very, very quickly and offers things that are unique and different from some of the other deck builders that are out there in the market. Now, I must say, I do prefer Hero Realms, which is the spin-off of this game, over this. I have not played Shards of Infinity. That one catches my interest, but at the same time, it's like, how many games of this same system do I need to have? Now, I do keep this because I do have a good, decent amount of content. I don't play it as much as Hero Realms, and to some extent, that has hurt this game, but I still appreciate it for what it is. And if Hero Realms were not in the picture at all, this game would see much more plays as far as I'm concerned. But for now, it's my number 10 science fiction themed game, Star Realms. Now we move on to my number 9, and my number 9 is Mission Red Planet, designed by Bruna Cathala and Bruna Faduti. This is a science fiction game, steampunk type of science fiction. So it might be a little outdated and antiquated in that regard, but it's cool and it's neat. And basically, players are trying to colonize the red planet, the planet Mars. And it's an area majority game, folks, where players are trying to control or have the majority in different regions so that they could have access to their resources. There's a set collection that takes place in the acquisition of these different resources, different natural resources that the planet produces that are of different values. And whoever has the most in those different sets scores points accordingly. But you also want to have access to some of these particular regions or colonies within Mars, because you have secret missions at the beginning of the game. And sometimes the secret missions may or may not be related to particular regions or even particular entire sections of the map of the board, the planet of Mars, which also has a little sideboard for the moon Phobos, which is also another region for area control or area majority. So there is some action selection or role selection that's taking place. Each player has 9 different roles, a deck of 1 through 9 cards, numbered 1 through 9, with 9 different roles. And they're simultaneously playing them face down, revealing them simultaneously, but then carrying out its actions in descending numerical order, going down up from 9 all the way down to number 1. And all of these different roles give you different abilities. And some of these abilities are very cutthroat. They allow you to kill astronauts who are on different planets or on different spaceships. Kill astronauts who are in particular regions of the board and replace them with your own. Or they allow you to do things like mount or board different ships with your different astronauts, maybe put 2 in 1 or put 1 in 2 different spaceships and what have you. And eventually these spaceships launch, and they launch to particular planets. The spaceships are represented by cards that have the name of the colony or the region within the planet that they're going to touch down on. And players are factoring all these things in, making their decisions, again, balancing the cutthroat nature of it all in the efforts to have the most points at the end of the game. And while lots of the scoring is public, it's available for public display, especially the set collection, some of those hidden missions do end up playing a huge factor in determining who wins the game at the end. And that is the fun element of this game. And there is a little bit of a feel of exploration as you discover, when you touch down on a planet, that this particular region produces that particular resource. You do not know until you touch down on that actual part of the planet. Factoring all these things in, just the idea, the artwork, the fact that the board is literally just a circle. It's a modular board with, well, not really modular, because you can't really mix and match it. But the point is, it has a bunch of different pieces that you put together and make the map, which is just a circle of the planet Mars. Really fun. My number 9 science fiction themed board game of all time, Mission Red Planet. Now we move on to my number 8. And my number 8 is Xenoshift Onslaught. And this game is another deck builder, my second deck builder in the game, in this list. But this one feels much more thematic than Star Realms, and I actually enjoy it more than Star Realms. First of all, I could play it solo without any expansions. Star Realms has a decent solo play with some expansions, but also, this is a cooperative themed game, which again, Star Realms with some expansions can turn into a cooperative game. But this game is a tower defense game where players are defending their home base from the onslaught of these different aliens that look like scary looking bugs and creatures. And you're recruiting different types of special op forces, Marines, and all these different units. And you're also equipping them with armor, you're equipping them with weapons, and all other types of items in the efforts to withhold and withstand the onslaught from these different waves of creatures or aliens that are attacking your base. And basically the game plays in 9 rounds, and all you're trying to do is survive. You are not trying, there's no other objective, there's not a certain victory point condition that you need to acquire, there's no enemy that you need to destroy and annihilate. You're just trying to survive 9 rounds. And if at the end of 9 rounds, your base still has life in it, then you're okay. Even if it's just 1 hit point. If you're alive, your base is alive, you win the game. Now, I have never won this game. The last time I played, I came the closest. It was the first time I ever actually made it to the 9th round. And I think I'm starting to crack the code. But for now, I haven't figured it out just yet. But I am enjoying this game. It is fun. It's fulfilling. And again, the science fiction does come out, especially in all of those different alien creatures that are attacking your base. Their names, their images, and also their special abilities and what they can do to your units and or base. All really stands out. My number 8 science fiction themed board game, Xenoshift Onslaught. And now we move on to my number 7. And my number 7 is a big box. And that is Star Trek Fleet Captains, designed by Mike Elliott and Ethan Pasternak, and published by WizKids. Now, this game is one of the games, probably the game on my list that most brings me into this kind of science fiction universe. First of all, it has a big Star Trek intellectual property, right? That's tacked onto it, and it's very well done. It's brought out well with the different cards, the different spaceships, the Federation spaceships and the Klingon spaceships. This is a 2-player game. It can be played multiplayer, but it's 2 sides just with the base game alone. Expansions can add different factions, but here you got the Federation and you got the Klingons, and you've got HeroClix shaped miniatures, which are really nice. I'm actually gonna show some of them off. You got these really nice miniatures, and there are some knocks on the miniatures. For example, the actual HeroClix dials sometimes are really complicated to rotate. Right now, I just finished rotating it with no problem. But yes, sometimes on some particular ships, more than others, they don't click as well or move as well, but this one happens to do it. But these are really nice miniatures. The HeroClix dials gives you information as to certain stats, because quite often throughout the game, what you're doing is you're managing the stats of your ships so that you could either put their emphasis on their engines so that they could travel and cover more territory in space, or you're putting your emphasis in your shield so you could survive the attacks of the Klingons, or the other way around, or you are putting your emphasis on your weapons so that you could deal out damage to your opponents. Really cool game with a really nice feel of space exploration, because the board, the modular board, is comprised of these hexagonal tiles that represent different places in space, but they start face down until you explore these areas. So there's a real feeling of exploring. And you could use your scanning abilities to cheat and peek underneath a tile and see what's there before actually wasting your time exploring that area. And what's underneath is usually different planets and nebulas and star systems. Sometimes you get some boring tiles, which are just empty space. Sometimes you get some really difficult, challenging tiles like a wormhole, right? And finding out what's underneath there is so cool. It really does give you that feel of exploration. You're trying to develop star bases in different places to score victory points, and also to create locations for players or ships to go to recover from damage, because you will incur damage as you engage in lots of conflict. There is lots of battling going on in this game, but the coolest thing is that you start with these mission cards, and the mission cards are your main way of scoring points. There's a few other ways of scoring points, but the mission cards are the main way of scoring points. And you have these missions. Some of them are secret. Your opponents can't see them. And some of them are visible. And they're in 3 different categories. You're either doing some sort of scientific mission, trying to accomplish something in space scientifically, or you're trying to do some sort of diplomatic or political mission, or you're trying to do some war missions, some attacking missions, which involve conflict with the Klingons or with the Federation if you are the Klingons. Really cool game. I've actually been playing it solo. I found a really cool solo module online, and I've been playing it solo, and I've been enjoying it very much in that way. But it plays well at 2 as well. Fun game. If you like the Star Trek intellectual property, I think this is a good investment. If you do not like Star Trek, maybe not so much. Mechanically speaking, it is a little clunky. It is a little fiddly. There's lots of little small rules that can get a little frustrating, a little bit hard to process and learn, especially early on. So if you're not interested in the IP, it may not be a game for you. But if you like Star Trek or enjoy it very much so like I do, this is a good investment of a game. My number 7 science fiction themed board game of all time, Star Trek Fleet Captains. My number 6 science fiction themed game of all time is Star Trek Expeditions. Also another Star Trek game designed by Reiner Knizia and published by WizKids Games. This game, I like it better than Star Trek Fleet Captains. First of all, this is a cooperative game. You can play solo. It plays anywhere from 1 to 4 players. And this game, again, it's another HeroClix system of games. So you have your HeroClix miniatures. I think the HeroClix miniatures here are a little bit better. You have 2 ships only in this game. You have the Starship Enterprise and the Klingon Battlecruiser. And their dials are nice and functional in this copy of the game, right? And you use their dials to rotate their stats accordingly based on damage that they take and what have you. And you also have HeroClix miniatures for the different characters, the 4 different characters in this game. You have Captain Kirk here, you have Leonard McCoy, you have Lieutenant Uhura here, and of course my favorite, Mr. Spock. And all these characters have different HeroClix stats based on their strengths and their weaknesses. And there's basically 3 different categories of stats. You've got command in yellow, you've got science in blue, and you've got engineering in red. And again, according to the character and their strengths, their skills or their stats will vary in those 3 different categories. And you're also in this game, your goal is to complete 3 different missions. You have a science mission or an ecology mission. You have a rebels mission, right? There's a rebellion taking place on the planet of Nibia where you guys are orbiting and touching down or beaming down from time to time. And you also have a politics mission that you're trying to resolve. So those are the 3 different categories. And you're basically trying to resolve this in as speedy a fashion as possible. Because first of all, as the game progresses, you're drawing cards that advance the star date, right? And the star date is basically a time track here, which is basically a ticking time bomb, because once it makes it to the very bottom here, the Klingons have completely taken over of this planet, the planet Nibia, and you have lost the game, no matter what progress you've made. Also here on this orbit track here, This is a factor which you will use to subtract or add points at the end of the game to your score, because there is a score for if you want to compare performances to future performances. But also, this track here is where the Klingon ship, starting from this end, and the Enterprise ship, starting from somewhere in the middle, are going to engage in battle. And what happens is you want to hold back the forces of the Klingons as much as possible, because if they, for whatever reason, happen to destroy the Starship Enterprise, then you have lost the game, no matter how much progress you've made in the missions. So factoring all these things in and keeping the right balance, having someone in the ship because the ship cannot engage in conflict unless someone's actually on the ship, knowing when to beam down and all the other different actions, lots of collaboration taking place, sometimes exchanging cards with teammates to give them strength or help them in certain categories or stats, or sometimes joining your teammates in certain locations on the board in order to help increase their chances of fulfilling particular missions and or objectives. Factoring all these things in, again, just the feeling of exploration as you enter into all these individual spaces or regions within the planet of Nibia. You're flipping cards face up and figuring out what is there for you. Really, really cool, really neat. And again, if you enjoy the Star Trek intellectual property, you will probably, and if you enjoy cooperative games, you will probably enjoy this game, Star Trek Expeditions, my number 6. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop, my 5 favorite science fiction themed board games of all time. First of all, number 5 is Tiny Epic Galaxies, designed by Scott Almes and Gamelin Games. This is a really cool game. It might not feel as thematic as some of these last few games that I mentioned for some people, but it is a very mechanically sound game, and I actually do get myself into the theme. I like the idea of all of the different planets represented by these cards, and the fact that your spaceships can do one or two things. They could actually touch down on the planet and get its one-time ability, or they can actually orbit the planet in the effort to little by little make progress on this colonization track and ultimately colonize this planet for your galaxy. Take the card, put it underneath your galaxy card, have its points added to your total, to your end game objective, and also have an additional ability that you could tap into on a more consistent basis without necessarily having to place your planets there. So it's so much fun managing and balancing all this with a really neat dice mechanism, a roll and lock mechanism, where you're rolling your dice and taking their actions. Well, actually, it's not roll and lock. You roll, and the only way you can re-roll, you get one free re-roll, but the only way you can continue re-rolling is if you use a particular resource, which this game calls energy, which looks like that, represented by this lightning bolt. So as you use energy, it can purchase you more re-rolls, and you're figuring all these things out. You can also use another currency referred to as culture to piggyback off of the roll of an opponent, right? So that's really cool. Now, it comes with an amazing AI solo variant with 5 different varying levels of difficulty and variety. And basically, you have a board for all 5 of these different levels of AI difficulty. So it's really cool. So if you feel like you're really good, you could play with a harder level of difficulty. If you don't feel as confident as I usually do, you could play with one of the lower ones. But it is so streamlined. The way you operate and manage that AI player's decisions is so simple. That way you just have to focus individually on what you're doing as a player. Because sometimes managing these solo variants is so much work that you actually lose track of your goals as the actual human player. Not the case with this game. Again, very streamlined, very smooth. My favorite Tiny Epic game to play solo for sure. And my number 5 science fiction themed game of all time, Tiny Epic Galaxies. And now we move on to my number 4 science fiction themed game. And this is actually a relatively new one to me. And that is Legendary Encounters, a alien deck building game. And if you've watched this channel for some time, you know that I love Marvel Legendary. And this is basically the same system of Legendary. You know, the cards, their symbols, and the deck building mechanism work just the same. The only difference is the story it tells. With Marvel Legendary, you have a bunch of villains occupying different spots of the city that you're trying to defeat, all while you're trying to overcome the efforts and the tactics of the mastermind. In this game, you're dealing with these different alien forces that are coming, and you have these objectives that you're trying to accomplish. And as the Hive deck has cards entered into the complex, you place the cards face down. And one of the things you could do with your attack power in this game is you could use it to scan these rooms so that you could flip those face down cards face up and see what's there. Is it a very scary looking alien? Is it perhaps a weaker, less threatening alien? Or is it one of your objectives that you're actually trying to accomplish? Factoring all these things in and figuring these things out is such a challenge. And it's very thematic. It's very exciting as you flip over a card and you find out that it's one of the objective cards that you needed to find in order to accomplish your objective. It's very frustrating when it's an alien that you're like, wow, this is a very powerful alien. It has a reveal ability that's detrimental to me. And it's on the verge of escaping the complex and entering the combat zone where it will inflict damage on me. Also, sometimes you have events and hazards that can also trigger very scary and negative events or actions that hurt you, right? Figuring all these things out is such a challenge. There's some great cooperation play in this game. It plays very well solo as well. It's a challenging game. You're dealing with all these strikes because every time a enemy in the combat zone attacks you, you draw these strike cards, and not all strike cards are created equal. Some of these strike cards are misses, so they don't deal you any damage, but some of them deal you 1 damage, 2 damage, 3 damage, all the way up to 5 damage. And that's another thing. Each player has an avatar, a character that they're controlling with a certain amount of hit points, a certain life value. And once you have incurred strikes that equal to more damage than what your character or your avatar's life or hit point value is, you are eliminated from the game. If it's a solo game, that's it, you've lost. If it's a team player game, your teammates could still try to win on your behalf. But this is really cool. If you like the alien theme, which it's an okay movie, it's an okay series, forgive me if I don't like it as much as you do. I like Marvel and the cinematic universe and the comic universe much more, so I'm still going to gravitate towards Marvel. But this is a great alternative, and from a gameplay perspective, I could see why many people are more intrigued with this game than they are with Marvel Legendary. But for now, it's good enough to make my number 4 science fiction themed board game of all time, Legendary Encounters. And now we move on to my number 3. And my number 3 science fiction game of all time. I love this game so much, I don't even care if it doesn't feel thematic to other people. My number 3 is Race for the Galaxy, designed by Thomas Layman and published by Rio Grande Games. I absolutely love this game. I have so much fun playing this game. This game, basically, players are creating their intergalactic empire, which consists of a tableau of cards that are comprised by either planets or developments. And some of these planets produce resources from you. Some of them are army or battle-heavy planets that help you conquer other planets in the future. And basically all your planets and all your developments are just cards in your hand that you're eventually over time placing on your tableau. And the way you purchase cards is they have a price, and this is a multi-purpose card game. So your cards are your actual planets and developments that make up your galactic empire, but they're also your money. You have to discard those cards from your hand in order to pay the price to place some of those other cards on your tableau. And moreover, they're also resources that slide under your production worlds every time you produce that you could eventually turn in for victory points. So again, this is a multi-purpose card game. Now, managing all that, managing your hand and the restrictions of only having 10 cards at the end of your turn, but at the same time having enough money to place down some of those more expensive cards that are really going to get you lots of victory points at the end of the game. Managing all that stuff is such a tight and tense experience, such an effort to try to optimize and maximize and squeeze out every single point you can from the cards you're drawing. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of luck because, yes, the luck of the draw, what cards do you actually draw in your hand? But managing that and trying to tap into the different abilities that the different cards give you, because not only do these cards give you victory points, but they give you different technological progress, different scientific benefits that are unique to that particular card. And trying to tap into all of those powers and activate them in their according phases in order to squeeze out and get as much from your deck and from your hand as possible. That is the challenge of the game. That's the bread and butter of this experience. Really fun. Once you learn and get past the very complex symbology or iconography, it becomes a smooth, almost a filler-like experience. This game, I squeeze it out in 25, 30 minutes tops every time I play it. I do play with the same people over and over again. Every once in a while, I'll introduce it to a new player just to add to that experience. But if it doesn't take on quickly, I move on and just stick to playing it with the people that I'm already playing with it. But for now, I really enjoy it. My number 3 science fiction themed board game of all time, Race for the Galaxy. And now we move on to my number 2. And my number 2 is Android Netrunner, originally designed by Richard Garfield, but this reimagining of it is by Lucas Litzinger. And this is a living card game, collectible card game type of game in the vein of Magic the Gathering. Richard Garfield, same designer of Magic the Gathering. But basically, this is science fiction. There's an evil or several evil, wicked corporations in this futuristic dystopian universe. And basically, you have the good guys, the Netrunners, who are trying to infiltrate these different corporations and steal their agendas. And one player is the Netrunner and one player is the evil corporation. And what's interesting is there's several factions. There's 4 factions, I think, for the corporations and 3 factions for the runners. And they're so asymmetric. This is the poster child of asymmetry as far as board games or games are concerned. Because the asymmetric nature of this game comes out even in the reading of the rules, because the terminology that's used to describe the different facets of the game, your hand of your cards, your deck of your cards, your discard pile of your cards, the cards you place down in your tableau, from one player to the other have totally different terms, totally different names to refer to them. So even getting past that, getting used to that, can be a little bit of a challenge when the first time you're reading the rule book and the first time you're teaching it to players. Mind you, I've only taught this game to one player, my friend Andrew, because I do think that it takes a special person to stand by and learn this game slowly and process all this information. But once you do, it is such a fun experience. The Netrunners trying to basically crack the code to get to the right places, to get to the right drives within the corporation systems in order to steal their agenda or their agendas. And the corporation is trying to subtly throw off and deviate the Netrunner and maybe even deceive the Netrunner, trick him, bait him into going into one place where they think there might be an agenda, and instead it's some sort of asset that actually hurts them and harms them and is to their detriment. It's a little bit like a game of chicken. It's you're always trying to outsmart, outthink, and anticipate your opponent and their actions. Really fun, really neat game. My number 2 science fiction themed game of all time, Android Netrunner. And now, finally, my number 1, and some people who've been watching this channel might have guessed it, and that is Cosmic Encounter. Love this game. The scientific or the science fiction of it is the idea of controlling an alien race that's in charge of their own intergalactic empire, their own planetary system, and they're basically trying to expand and colonize outside of their galaxy. But they're doing this through either diplomacy and political negotiation or through brute force, just running over the opposition, using their allies in efforts to take over other planets. And you're doing this, it's a simple card play mechanism to resolve combat with numbers on these cards. And as you play the game, you know the numbers that are out in the deck and the probabilities and what have you. But there's also special alien powers that distinguish you from other players and give you slight advantages. And taking those alien powers and running with them and bringing out or getting the most out of them is the challenge of this game. I've got this alien power, and this is my approach for this particular game. It may not be my approach in a vacuum. It may not have been my approach in the last game I played, but it's my approach in this game because of the particular alien race that I have drawn for this game. And figuring out who on the table are your allies, making those smart, strategic alliances, right? Knowing that this person and their power, if I can have them on my side, I have a really good chance of winning, right? And again, knowing when to be diplomatic, when to engage in conflict, when to accept the offer negotiation, although there's always the risk that the person is lying to you and they have no intentions of negotiating, and instead they're going to secretly attack you. Woohoo! This game, you definitely need to be a merciful, forgiving person to play this game, because sometimes the things that people do to you are going to straight up piss you off. My number one science fiction themed game of all time, Cosmic Encounter. And that's it, folks. Those are my top 10 science fiction themed games of all time. Comment down below. Tell me, what are your favorite science fiction games of all time? What do you think about my top 10? Perhaps there's some suggestions, some recommendations you'd like to make to me. This is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.